MCCTV is largely about what happens in the classrooms of Metropolitan Community College, but we also present interviews with speakers, authors, and performers who visit our campuses. And once a quarter, we sit down with the president and CEO of the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce for a chat about the economic health and development of our viewing area. The conversation ahead is about the third quarter of 2021, and moreover, thank you to David Brown and a review of his tenure as he gets set to retire from his chamber post at the end of the calendar year or shortly thereafter. I'm your host, Kent Pavelka, and this is MCC TV. And welcome, everybody, and to you too, David, once again. So much to cover in 30 minutes, and one of our last shows together. Hopefully we'll have maybe one more at the beginning of next year. Sure. But I'm just curious, as we respond to the news that you're retiring, how you're feeling about things as the curtain comes down on your duties at the Chamber.
You know, it is clearly bittersweet. You know, we've had a remarkable run here since '03. Wife and I and family all call Omaha home, and it's been a great run. We've had a lot accomplished, and there's a lot more exciting things even coming down the pike. But I think 18, 19 years in this gig is gracious plenty, and there's some things we want to do as a family, and I want to do professionally as sort of a next chapter. So the timing seemed right. So on the one hand, I'm really proud of what we've got done, and the other, I'm really curious to see how the future sort of works out, not just for me and my family, but for Omaha, because there's so many things that are on the edge and ready to take off.
Sounds like you plan to stay plugged in some way, and we'll talk more about that. Let's talk a little bit about chamber business
Sure.
For 2021 and the third quarter. Then we'll get back to. I want to chat with you about your tenure. How about economic development results in the third quarter? I guess we could start. One item would be the Amazon sortation center, correct?
Yeah, that's a big project. You know, Amazon announced a huge distribution facility in the region early in the year, and this will be their second smaller yet still large sortation center. So just think that everything that comes into the big facility goes down to the smaller facilities and then gets sent out to your home and mine, right, with all those smiling trucks. So that's what these facilities will be about. So there'll be 500 jobs, several $100 million in investment that they'll put in that project. So it's a nice addition to the market, good paying jobs, consistent. It takes advantage of the center of a country location that Omaha has always been so proud of.
Amazon continues to massage what they're doing in our area. What's the feel for down the line? Are they about done with what they intend to do in our area?
You know, Kent, I don't think so. I think what we keep finding is as companies come in and invest for the first time, they start realizing the quality of the workforce. They start recognizing the quality of the infrastructure and the low cost of business overall. And so I think we'll have more things we can see from Amazon as we go down the pike here. Good.
Novozymes, the expansion of Novozymes in Blair.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
You know, Novozymes has been this really interesting company that just sort of stays below the radar. I mean, they've invested well over $250 million on the Cargill campus already. And they're a big supplier of enzymes to the ethanol industry around the world. And they're also doing research to try and find other ways that they can use different products to create ethanol. But this most recent investment is more than $300 million. And it's a little more than double their size in Cargill campus, and actually branch out a little bit about the kinds of products that they produce. So if you think about that, the company's got more than $500 million investment and several hundred jobs up in Blair. Very quietly kind of went forward and did this project, and they continue to have a big impact up there.
So how do the numbers look for the year, David? First of all, for the capital investment numbers for the third quarter, and then for the calendar year to date.
You know, we've set a very conservative goal for capital investment for the year, thinking that the pandemic might have some impact on the backlog and closing some projects. So we had about a $400 million capital investment goal, And as of the end of the third quarter, we were north of 1.3 billion. So clearly we undershot on our goals, but we had a really great year from a capital investment perspective. Similar with jobs, not only do we have about 2,500 jobs so far, but the wages of those jobs year to date exceed $50,000 a year, which is exactly the goal that we wanted to achieve. So jobs, investment, payroll, all those numbers are above what we had set for the year. So
Very
it's going
good.
to be a great year for us.
You bet. Let's talk a little bit about the American Rescue Plan and the act and the allocation of funds. You made some recommendations, the chamber did. Talk a little bit about that, what kind of money we're talking about and how you'd like to see it allocated.
Sure. So I think the big issue here is that this is the second pot of stimulus money that came from Washington. The first pot was really targeted at people that were unemployed, that needed to be upskilled, at paying for medical issues, things that were early in the pandemic that really needed to be paid for. The second round is really more targeted at things that can happen over the next 3 years, and it's pretty significant money. The state alone will get, just by the state, will get $1.2 billion. The city will get about 112 million. The county will get just shy of 100 million. School districts get their own pot of money. Universities get their own pot of money. So there's a lot of money that's kind of flowing into the system across the country. And we're trying to work now with both the state, the governor, as well as the appropriations committee and the mayor and county to try and figure out what we think would be the most appropriate use of those funds. Mm-hmm. At the state level, we really focused hard on programs that would benefit the entire state. Instead of going there and saying, we think Omaha and the region needs this much, we worked with the state chamber and with the Lincoln chamber and the other chambers across the state to come up with a broad set of goals that focus on workforce and innovation and site development. And across all of those is a theory of diversity, equity, and inclusion being included in all of those kind of activities. So we've recommended, we were one of 48 groups that was invited to testify in front of the Appropriations Committee about a month ago. We did so, and we focused on those areas I talked to you about. The site development, a good example is the ability to acquire a mega site. Now, a mega site is 1,000 acres plus that needs to be in place if we're going to be successful attracting a large chip manufacturer or a large auto manufacturer or some very big job producer. And the acquiring of that property is difficult to do, but our competition, for the most part, already have mega sites in place. And so if we really want to compete for some of those projects, we need to get a mega site in place as well. That's a big number. That's $120 million. We realize it's a big number, but this might be the one opportunity where there's that much money available to make that happen. On the talent side, we really decided that we wanted to put a lot of money into internships, partnering with community colleges, with the K through 12 system, and with the four-year schools to really make internships the primary source of development, retention, and attraction for talent in this market. So we've asked for a $30 million fund that would be used to set up an organization that will then work with in the community college regions to develop really aggressive internship programs with businesses. And it's more than saying, here's some money, business, go hire an intern. Matter of fact, there'll be very little of that. Most of it will be, here's how we set up an effective internship program within companies and within schools. And then we need to start filling those pipelines full of students so that they're ready for the careers that we have available down the road. So we're hopeful that that's going to be moving ahead. We're partnering with all the different workforce development organizations across the state to create this one singular program statewide. And then interestingly, I think on the other parts of this is we've said, look, you've already got really effective programs for job training and for investment in startups and those kinds of things. But those programs are just notoriously underfunded. So here's an opportunity to throw a chunk of change at each of those existing programs with existing infrastructure and existing administration. It just makes it available for more businesses to grow in the state. So I could go on for a long, long time, but in the end, it does come down to how do we grow the economy? How do we grow the workforce? How do we grow the infrastructure necessary to be successful long-term in the state? We presented those and some other recommendations to the mayor for her to consider for distribution at the city level. And we've got a couple of projects that we're also considering going to the county and asking for some support in conjunction with the project at the city. So we're all in on trying to figure out a way to most effectively invest this money. That's a one-time pop that's coming to the state.
Okay. I'm going to talk about you now. Let's reflect a little bit on your tenure as chamber president and CEO. The year was 2003. You came to Omaha from Greenville, South Carolina. Indulge us a little bit with your story, and let's go back earlier than Greenville to your roots. Where did you come up? Okay,
well, geez, my favorite topic, talking about myself.
Yeah,
I'm being facetious here. Well, I mean, that make a really, really long and boring story short. I grew up in Detroit, one of 6 kids, went out east to school, and got this weird bug to say I wanted to start doing work in developing communities and developing economies. So I started working. My first jobs out of college were in Michigan, working for county government, doing primarily economic development financing. I ended up in Monroe, Michigan, where I became the first president of a nonprofit industrial development corporation at the ripe old age of 26. Walked in, and there was a directory and a budget and a phone on the floor, and they said, "Go for it. It's all yours." And thankfully, I had a really dynamic board there who basically gave me a on-the-job MBA, taught me how to do everything I needed to do, to how to run a nonprofit, how to work with volunteers, how to do all those things organizationally that you need to do to be effective. I already knew how to finance economic development and to do that sales pitch, but all the rest of it I had to learn, and they were gracious in teaching me how to do all that stuff. Stayed there a couple of years, and by 85, I was recruited to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, to be the vice president for economic development at the Fort Wayne Chamber. First chamber I ever worked for. Really didn't have any aspirations to work for chambers, but this was the first one that I had seen that was responsible for both economic development as well as traditional chamber public policy and infrastructure and those kinds of things. Did that job for 5 years and loved it, and got promoted to president in 1989. I was president there until 95, when I was recruited to go to Greenville, South Carolina, to run that chamber. It was also a chamber that did economic development, so it fit well with what my experience had been. Had never worked in the South, and so it was a good opportunity to kind of get a feel for what the South was all about from an economic development perspective. And then finally in 2003, decided that we'd done just about all we could do there, and started doing some consulting and hunting around for what might be available somewhere else. And I was fortunate that the Omaha job was available. I threw my hat in the ring and was hired and started there in October of 2003. So
what was it about chamber type work that appealed to you? And I mean, did you have other options or interests other than that, like in college, or I mean, what was the bug that bit you? And then finally, what was it about the Omaha job that appealed to you?
Good question. So interestingly, in college, I kind of fell into this economic development thing by mistake, or accidentally maybe. I decided I wanted to be an architect, and because I thought that had something to do with building buildings and building developments, et cetera. And found out that the labs required for the architecture program were only offered in the fall and in the afternoon. You know this about me, Kent. I played football in college, and I realized that I liked football more than I liked architecture. So I decided to drop architecture and went into a class that I thought was just going to be an easy, interesting class. And it was about industrial location theory, why some communities grow and some don't. And it was offered by a visiting professor, a corporate real estate guy. And I went in the class, and I was just hooked from then on in. Everything he talked about, communities competing, community infrastructure, growing communities from within and from without, all those things that you have to worry about when you're building communities, it just settled right in, and it was really comfortable. So every class I took from then on out at school was about marketing or about economics or about sales or about development or about anything I could get my hands on. And so I ended up coming out of college saying, I really want to work on building communities and building economies. That's really where kind of in the general way I wanted to spend time. I fell into this economic development job because it also had some land use planning that went along with it. So I got both the community development and the economic development stuff to it. And my career along the way has really kind of focused on how do you build communities. And chambers, interestingly, I never thought of it this way, but chambers of commerce are really uniquely situated to do that kind of work. We have zero authority to do anything. So the only way we get anything done is by being kind of the ultimate convener or facilitator, using the credibility that we gain by having a large membership base of business leaders who also want to see the community grow. Chambers are this really unique organization that can lead from behind or lead out front, can collaborate or can cooperate or can just lead by on their own. It's a really interesting model that you can just utilize the skills of the business community and the partnerships that you can create to improve communities and make economic development happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, excuse me, go ahead.
All the places that I'd been gave us some element of that. Some were better at pieces of it than others. I got better at it as I got more experienced, and so the chambers seemed to get more and more. We accomplished our goals and got more successful. But when I was interviewing in Omaha, I was just dumbfounded by this community that I really had never competed against, never knew much about, never really thought much about, because again, the places I was didn't compete much with Omaha. But in the interview process, I was fortunate to be able to meet with a large number of some of the CEOs in town. And I asked them about these public-private partnerships that they engage in and all the community growth that's happened and all the stories I had heard about how involved the CEOs of these big companies were in not just writing checks, but actually leading organizations and campaigns, et cetera. And I asked them all, why did you do it? And they all gave me the same answer, which was frankly shocking. It was almost like the chamber couldn't have trained all these people to say these things. So there's just too many of them, and they're all saying virtually the same thing. And I asked them, why are you doing all this stuff? And they said, well, it's because we wanted this to be a better place for our kids and for our grandkids and for our employees. And if it's that simple, and of course that complex, all of a sudden the clarity was, geez, they're doing this for all the right reasons, which means they're going to be passionate about what they're doing. And that's reflected in all these great things that they've already accomplished in this community over the years. So it was an intriguing mix of passion and optimism, impatience. They wanted things to happen. They didn't want to wait too long to do it, and the willingness to invest their money and time to make it happen. So that's a very unique mix of things that when I got here, realized that Omaha had that many other places don't have to offer.
Yes. When you think about the 19 years, I guess it will be, the accomplishments and things that you tackled and got done, maybe talk about the most significant ones, the most challenging ones, and the ones that you're most proud of.
I think the one that'll have the longest term impact is one that we did early on in my tenure here. We, of course, as I mentioned, we don't have authority to do anything, so we partner on everything that we do. But there was one thing that stood out as a newcomer to town. I was trying to figure out which school to send our 9-year-old to. And he was just getting up into middle school. And so I was trying to compare the schools that we had in South Carolina to the public schools here. And what I found is you couldn't do it because each of the school districts here were able to develop their own level of assessments for each grade level. And they weren't consistent with each other. So there was no standard test across the state that was norm referenced with any of the school districts around the country. And so as I started looking into it, I realized that really needed to change because if we're really going to be moving companies and people here, my own experience should have been indication that we have a problem, that I couldn't figure out where to send my son because I didn't have the data. So over the next few years, we worked hard in legislature and ultimately changed it so that all districts have a a common set of standardized tests that the children take. It took 4 or 5 years for the tests to be developed and tested, if you will. But in the end, I think we now know which schools are doing really well and which ones still need help. We can compare them, and we know where we can spend time and energy to make them better. And I think that's a long term that might have the biggest impact of anything that we've done. I mean, we've passed 2 economic development incentive legislation or laws that sunset after 10 years. And so I've been here long enough to have to work on 2 of those. We got those done, which is really good for business and I think really good for growth in the state. You know, I think maybe the piece that now moves us into the future even more is this Omaha 2040 strategy that we completed in 2018. We were trying to figure out how do we continue growing the community. But we realized in 2017 that it was really more about growth. It's also about quality. It was about people. And so in partnership with the United Way of the Midlands and the Urban League of Nebraska, we hired Rebecca Ryan, who is a futurist, to come on our staff as our resident futurist at the chamber for a year. And we ran through a process where about 1,000 volunteers engaged in trying to define what Omaha could be in 2040. And we came up with the Omaha 2040 strategy, which is focused on prosperity, people, and place. And it's really set a brand new sort of foundation for how the chamber can move forward, but not just the chamber, but really the whole community. And so I think that might be the thing that 20 years from now, somebody will say, hey, back in 2018, you know, the chamber and United Way and the Urban League put this plan in effect, and look, we're here, we've arrived, we've done it. And we did it because we identified the goal, and then we backcasted from it to figure out what we had to accomplish every 5 years to get to that. So, I mean, I'm really proud of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we're doing. I'm really proud about the entrepreneurship work that we have put in place. I think our talent initiative has gone a lot of different places already, and I think it's just now taking the next step into what businesses really need to build that workplace of the future. So I'm proud of all the work that we've done, whether it's public policy or whether it's economic development or talent development. I mean, in the end, it was all about building the community better. And I think we've been able to accomplish that.
Well, let's look at it from another perspective, though, as you get set to leave your position. Those things maybe that you found roadblocks at the end of the street, the places, the things that you would like to have accomplished that maybe are left undone at this point. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. We have tried really now for 18 years to undertake some major tax reform in the state. And you and I have been talking about that for as long as I've been here, Kent. And we made some progress, bits and pieces along the way, but really got to a point where some significant change had to happen. And I think Blueprint Nebraska, working through that process, was able to identify really a path forward to make that happen. But we've got some work to do. I mean, we're not competitive from an income tax perspective. We're okay on a sales tax perspective. We're not competitive on a property tax perspective, but there's an awful lot of money being spent at the state level to reduce the impact of property tax challenges. But in the end, I think if there's one thing that I regret, is that we didn't get that done while I was here. We can still do it, and they, being the community, can continue doing this and make this happen. But that might be one of the biggest ones. The other is, I've never understood the rural-urban rift that occurred in the state. It gets more and more and more aggressive as money gets tighter or as issues pop up that just reflect how different the urban communities and the rural communities are.
Isn't some of that about property tax, though?
Well, I think it's hidden behind the property tax issue. Property taxes really are levied at the local level. So we are all our own worst enemy. When the issue comes up and says, hey, can I go above my levy for our schools? We always say yes. When the next bond issue for whatever comes down the pike for whatever capital investment, we always say yes. And that's just the nature of who we are, but it also means that we're not willing to control expenses at the local level. And so we're willing to raise property taxes to pay for it. certainly property taxes are a challenge in western Nebraska, greater Nebraska, who are, land rich, let's say, and cash flow poor. But that doesn't answer the question about why there is such animus between kind of urban and rural sometimes. What's interesting is the businesses don't have that animus. They want to continue doing business together. A lot of times the communities actually are looking to how we can help each other. It seems to be far less competitive. It's not as parochial, it seems like. But when we get to the legislature, that animus to sort of keep stuff from happening. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody because it happens on both sides of the equation. But there's a certain point where this is all about the state of Nebraska. And the state's going to benefit if everybody benefits. The urban communities cannot be the only thriving economy in this state and have the state be successful. And the urban communities can't be the only successful group and expect to rely upon them for all the stuff that we need. So somehow we are interrelated, and we've got to understand that's the expectation, and that's the only way we're really going to get things done. So I suppose that's a little more esoteric than saying I want lower taxes or better taxes, but this relationship across the state, really needs to be more productive. And it's just going to take some leaders to sort of take their time and get that work done.
What does it look like if that does get accomplished, if that animus is removed from the scene?
Well, I just think you start seeing a lot more collaboration. I think if you're right now fighting over who gets what money or who gets what jobs or who gets whatever, all of a sudden you start realizing that we all have our own strengths and weaknesses, and we can emphasize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses, and all the communities do better. But you got to get past this notion that it's either them or us. I mean, we are all us. And somehow or another, I think, Nebraska has to figure out how to work together on these great big projects, or in the end, our relatively low population, our relatively slow population growth across the state, and our relatively high property taxes and some other fees that we have that other states don't have, all of a sudden we're going to see ourselves looking out there wondering, how did everybody pass us in the dust?
Mm-hmm.
We can't afford to have that happen.
So you think our growth is being retarded because of this issue?
I think so. I don't think there's no way we can provide the best services and the best product and the best quality if we're not debating those things. If instead we're fighting about little things because we can't afford to get past the urban and rural challenges that we have. The state is a great place. Don't get me wrong. I love it here. We're staying here after retirement. I can't wait to see what can happen. But leadership has really got to be able to stand up and say, it doesn't matter what congressional district you're in, we want to see prosperity. And that prosperity means that it's going to take resources of all kinds to make those happen. And we ought to make those available everywhere across the state.
David, what about the chamber and its leadership going forward? Do you have any input in the process of steering the ship forward?
We're going to, the chamber is providing administrative support right now to the search committee at the chamber, and we've hired a search firm to actually do a national search for my successor. I imagine that they will get a good list of folks who have a desire to partake in this kind of a market, and see after they see the kinds of things we've gotten done. I will not have a say in who's selected in the process. I'll be happy to help any way they want me to, but I think as should be, the search committee has a process that they want to undertake, and they'll ask us for help when they need it. Otherwise, we hope that by the spring we'll have a candidate announced, and we'll start preparing the path for he or she to come in and do this job really, really well.
Can you give us a little more hint as to what the future holds for you? Say you're not going to retire per se.
Yeah, there's my wife has been crazy supportive of what I've done for 40 years now. Next May will be 40 years we've been married. And I've been dragging her around the country and around the world for those 40 years. And it's all been about my schedule. And it's all been about my job. And, it's time that some of this is her time. And so she'll look at me and say, I don't want you around all the time. I mean, you'll drive me crazy. And so I've got some consulting things I'm lining up, and we've got some writing that I want to do. But a good bit of it is just spending time with my wife and my kids and our grandchild, and just go places we want to go because we haven't had a chance to do when we were so busy working.
Are you a conventional hobby guy?
Yeah, no. I love to work around the house.
Yeah.
I love to golf. I love to read. We love landscaping and that kind of stuff. So there's always something to keep me busy. But I want to keep my mind busy too. So I've got some consulting opportunities lined up that'll give me a chance to do some things several times a year, just to keep my hand in it and to see if I can help other communities grow in some way.
Well, I can't tell you what a personal pleasure it's been to be involved with our relationship and doing this show. And I know I'm really happy to hear you're not leaving town. And maybe we can do another show before it's all over.
Yeah, I'd love to. This has been a great joy, Ken. I mean, I think we used to do these in person on the set. They were an hour long, and we did them as often as we could possibly put them in. And it was a blast. And I was always surprised by the number of insomniacs out there who would call me and say, hey, I was up at 3 this morning and I was flicking the channels and I saw you talking to Kent and doing this thing at Metro. So people did see it and people paid attention to it. And I've always enjoyed doing it. So thanks for being such a gracious host and having me engage in this process. It's been a blast.
Thank you, David. And thank you all for being with us on MCCTV. Our goal to better acquaint you with the mission, leadership, and the reach of the college. I'm Kent Pavelka along with David Brown, and this is MCCTV.